What are the benefits of open science and where do we see challenges? And how does this influence the future of open science? Let's see if we can wrap our head around these questions and summarize the past few weeks from the MOOC on open science, sharing your research with the world. My name is Pim, I work in education and today I will go over a few questions on open science together with the modules instructors of the different weeks. Joining me today we have Alessandra, Anneke, Nicole, Marcia, Lisanne and Sandra. In 3 blocks we will dive into one of the questions and explore different aspects of open science. Alessandra, in the first week you introduced open science and gave a brief history overview. You had a really interesting interview with Maria Cruz, talk about motivations to do open science, and we asked the participants to make their contributions on what they think are the advantages. What do you see as the advantages of doing open science?
Well, Pim, I see that there are advantages both for the researchers and the larger communities, because when you share your work, other people can build upon your work and learn from your work. And so you can push forward and have more impact with your research. Also, if you share all the different parts of your research, you build trust on the research process and people think that you are reliable and a relevant scientist.
And those are 2 really key aspects, relevance and reliability. You mentioned the larger community. Does that mean that open science is maybe more than just the researchers?
Yes, for me it is. I like the idea of thinking about open scholarship rather than open science because there you can encompass all the people that have to do with research, even research support staff or the general public that participate, for example, in citizen science.
Like the people in this MOOC, or we as instructors who are not doing research all the time.
Yes.
Open scholarship sounds like a nice word. With this word, we jump a bit into the MOOC to the last module where Sandra, you talked about citizen science.
Yeah.
Citizen science might be a nice way to promote open science and this open scholarship that we just discussed.
Yeah, true. I think many people would say that, but me in particular, I would say that it can do much more than that because when you practice citizen science as a researcher, you include and collaborate with citizens, and that is much more than just promoting science. That is embracing them to take part into science.
It's more of an enabler, so to say, right?
Yeah, so that's what a lot of people do say, that citizen science enables open science. But in my opinion, it goes 2 ways. It enables open science, but if open science is well practiced, then it enables citizen science. Like, for example, if you have open publishing, then with open journals and open papers, then citizens can enter without any license, don't have to pay for the information, so they can participate much better and gain more information to practice science.
So that's almost a 2-way stream, so to say.
Yeah, in my opinion it is, yeah.
So citizens can benefit from the open research and the researcher can benefit from the citizens as well?
Yes, of course. If citizens join in science, which is what you do when you practice citizen science, you ensure that there is, for example, more data opportunities or more data analysis opportunity. But there's much more than just the clear technical contribution to science. It's also the enabler to have people understand more what the scientist is doing by actually joining in. You gain, you educate, but you also gain awareness about the complications of science, for example. And that makes scientists' work much more interesting, transparent, and hopefully also gains more impact for the scientist's work.
More impact, trust. That sounds like we started this blog with the benefits of open science. Back to you, Alessandra. Do you think citizen science therefore is a bit of a prerequisite for being an open scholar? Or are there more benefits that go beyond?
That's an interesting question. I think that being an open scholar means, be able to reproduce and share your research with everybody, which is the title of this MOOC at the end, sharing your research with the world. And I see, as Sandra said, a very interesting role for citizen science in pushing this open scholarship forward.
Pushing open scholarship forward. Nice. Sandra, you discussed in your module a few things, right, on the conditions of including citizens, because Alessandra already mentioned the relevance and reliability. You must run into those questions as well. So what kind of tools do you have for us to strengthen those benefits?
To strengthen the benefits? Do you mean in the sense of strengthening the benefits for open scholarship, or what
do we need to do to make sure that those citizens are not into the distrust, but really make sure that we can trust them?
Well, one of the really important parts is that when you start working together with citizens, they put in input, they put effort, for your work on average, because you're asking them to contribute. Which means that if you then don't do anything with their input, if you don't do anything with their collected data or the analysis, or if you don't show what you did with that, so giving feedback is very important, then of course you're actually doing the opposite. Instead of gaining trust, you're losing that trust and you're making it worse. So there is a risk in that, but if you follow, I do tell it in the module, but if you follow those type of basic principles, then I think it will only strengthen it, yes.
Nice. Do you have anything to add to this, Alessandra?
Well, one of the things that I like about citizen science, and Sandra said, is the idea that there are people contributing. And the whole idea about open science is that the community is contributing. It's not a single individual achievement. Is if we work all together and we embrace the principle of open science, then we can make it really open.
Actually, if I can just pin in on this, the more interesting part will become when citizen science will be an initiative started by the citizens themselves and where they start including scientists. And that will be, it's a very new field, but it will perhaps increase the openness even further. And then the question is how many people would like that? How many scientists would like that? But that would make it extremely interesting.
I certainly agree. I think we have a bright future for that ahead of us.
Nice. We already touched a bit upon the challenges, and that's something for the next block. So we've talked about trust, about relevance, about a two-way stream, open science and the many benefits. But with all those benefits, it's also time to look a bit at the challenges that we might face and how to deal with those. So stay tuned, and we go to the next block. Wonderful insights. With all these benefits, we must discuss some of the challenges as well. I can imagine challenges in the start, middle, and end of your research project. Let's start at the end. Nicole, in the third module, you dealt with open access and publishing. We asked contributions from the participants, and one of the things that we encountered was the accessibility. But what do you see as one of the main challenges in publishing open access for open science?
Yeah, so publishing open access is known for a long time by the researchers now, but I see that there's still some confusion about it, and it seems also that some misconceptions are very difficult to get rid of. So the first one is the impact factor of journals in general. And open access journals can have a high impact factor, but still a lot of journals are held by commercial publishers. And the commercial publishers have introduced the hybrid model of publishing, which means that you have to pay APCs when you want your article to be accessible right away to everybody.
The APCs? What are the APCs?
Yeah, the article processing charges.
The money that needs to be paid.
Yeah, the money that needs to be paid to make your article accessible right away. And not every author or institution can afford to pay these APCs. And if you choose to go the green way of publishing, the self-archiving of your publication, then you can be confronted to quite long embargo periods. So this is not really encouraging you to publish open access that way. On the other hand, the APCs are also a hurdle when you publish in the gold open access journals. So that's the business model is not right here, I would say.
And that's the business model
of open access publishing.
Open access publishing.
So this is the one of the important hurdles when publishing open access. And green open access is also seems not to be the preferred chosen one way to publish open access, because it means that you have extra actions to do, and also it's not so recognized by now by the researchers. So that is one of the challenges, changing the existing business model. Another challenge, I would say, for authors is handling the copyright of their publications. Now often they transfer the copyright, and means also that they do not have certain rights to reuse their publications and so on.
So even if I publish something, what happens right now, and that's one of the challenges you mentioned, is I don't own my own paper or my own publication anymore. I transfer the rights to the publisher. Even with open access?
Sometimes even with open access, but because it's then open access published, it's accessible to everybody, and you can reuse it by your own also. And finally, I would say publishing open access is just one step in the whole publishing process of your research. It should be linked to your data, your software, and all other information pieces that makes your research complete and transparent.
So it's not just about the end, it's also about
it's
the
not
middle
just
and the
about
beginning.
the article or about a conference paper. It's the whole information package that
the whole
you
research
produce.
project, actually.
The whole research project.
I see you already looking at Anneke, because Anneke, your module was a bit on the data reuse and data accessibility.
Yeah.
What do you see as the challenges, and do they align with what Nicole mentioned earlier?
So there are still a lot of challenges in openly sharing your research data, but also the use of it. So it's not just from the perspective of the provider of the data, but also the user. But as a researcher, so as a provider, not every researcher knows how to actually open up this data. Where do you go? Where do you start? It takes time. It takes effort. There are quite a lot of hurdles. So if you are facing these kind of hurdles, then you may just think, well, let me not share my data openly. It's too much effort. And at the same time, even if you have decided that you will still open your data, you're willing to take this effort, to take the time for it, you're not being acknowledged that much as a researcher for openly sharing your data. So it's a lot of publications that are being acknowledged for researchers, but nobody ever asked me how many data sets did you share, and people ask you, well, how many papers did you publish?
How many data sets did you share, Anneke?
That's a good question. I don't remember by heart, but I've published quite some of them.
So back to those effort that you need to take. If you're talking to researchers, what is your main argument to convince them to do it the way that we advocate, to share stuff open?
Yeah, there are actually many reasons. First of all, I think that your research becomes better if you think in advance, I'm going to share my data later on. So if you know that somebody else will also see this data, you'll probably have a data set that has clearer variables, that has explanations for other researchers who are perhaps going to use that data in the future. So it results in better structure and order of your data sets.
I can remember that from the time that I was still studying, when I know that other people had to work with the same reports, with the same data sets. It already made me organized, not just for myself, but also for them.
Exactly.
And what I hear you say is it leads to at least a better structure, right? And that has all kinds of benefits.
Yeah, and better science eventually, better research. Yes.
Nice, and that's what the goal is eventually. Do you see that as well, Nicole? When people publish that, or when they want to publish open access, the sooner they decide, the easier it is for them to make them publish in an open access journal?
No, I don't think it's the same process. It's more about choosing the journal before you publish, because you choose it based on the scope of the journal, but also the audience of the journal. And so you do not need so much to organize it. It's more when you follow the green road, then of course you need to know where you can share your publication later on. Is it in the institutional repository? Is it on some other repositories existing, and so on? So that's more the question that you get, but it's more afterwards, not in before.
Did you have any other challenges that you were thinking about for?
One of the challenges I would say is also how the general impact is measured, and now you use a lot of metrics that are based on the past situation, looking at a number of citations and so on. And if you want to evaluate open science in a right way, I would say we need to invent new criteria how to evaluate open science, and how a researcher or education, how is it open, and what does it mean? So
Interesting thoughts. Thanks, Nicole. Anneke, did you have any additional challenges?
I think that it's a challenge to build a culture where researchers are openly sharing their data, but also reusing each other's data. It's not something that is commonly happening now. If researchers doing so are usually the exception.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you see a lot of role models around you, other professors, other students sharing, you reusing each other's data, that influences researchers. So hopefully in the right way, and hopefully they will then also reuse each other's data more and openly share their own data more as well.
So it's a balance, right? If you use the data of others, it becomes more likely that you will
also
publish
think
your
about
own?
how to share your own data. Yes, I think so.
Quid pro quo. So giving something and making sure, or taking something and make sure you give something back.
Yeah, and this way we can build an ecosystem where there's a nice balance between this, and it's not just a few researchers sharing their data and a few others using it and profiting from it.
Nice. And how long do you think that will... is that process already started?
I think we're still at the beginning of that process, we're taking the first steps, and there are a lot of good initiatives to further promote this culture building, if you could call it that way,
Mm-hmm.
or ecosystem building, but there's still a long way that we need to go.
But luckily we have tools, right? I think we talked a bit about the effort. That was one of your first challenges in this MOOC. You gave them some insights, right, in how to work with this.
Yes, definitely. So we've discussed some of these tools in the course, and hopefully these are useful for building this ecosystem. And also research institutions can do more, I think, which is a bit outside the scope of this MOOC, but there are other instruments that also can be used to further promote this ecosystem building.
Nice. So we talked about a culture change. Thanks again for your contributions, Anneke and Nicole. This gives a nice new perspective on the discussions we had so far within the MOOC. Now let's look a bit into the future of open science. Thanks again for your contributions, Anneke, Nicole. This gives a nice new perspective on the discussions we had so far within the MOOC. Now let's look a bit into the future of open science. Lisanne, you are involved in one of the optional modules within open science on research visibility and the way impact and visibility are measured. I can imagine that in the future this will be different than what we are used to in the past. Can you share your view a bit on the way we measure this changed impact?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Pim. Yes, in the module we already showed a bit that the way we measure impact is changing and the way we are measuring visibility. So, whereas first we looked at, citations, now there are more and diverse ways to how we measure visibility, and as well as impact. And I imagine in the future this will only further open up, and it will open up the way we practice science.
Do you have one example of such a measurement?
Yes. So of course, in our module we talk about next generation metrics, so altmetrics as an additional way to measure visibility. So not only looking at journal impact factors, but also looking at social media or how an article, is published in policy documents. And I think for researchers, it's a very exciting opportunity to look at where their research is ending up. Even more than evaluating a research, I think it's a great way for researchers to really find out, who is interested in my work, and to maybe find new people to collaborate with, which I think opens up science a lot.
Nice. Thanks, Lisanne. Wonderful insights. I want to make a switch to what we've heard before regarding the challenges of sharing data and reuse by Anneke. Marcia, in the open software module, you talk a bit about reuse and reusing data with the licenses and tools to make software fair. How do you see the future of fair software going from here on out?
Thank you, Pim. I think it's a very good question. And indeed, in this introductory model, we just scratch the surface a little bit and in explaining what FAIR is. And the main statement we wanted to make that this applies not only to bigger projects or big companies, but everyone who's doing research should consider that it also applies to themselves, even if they're writing just a small piece of code.
So for FAIR, the findability, the accessibility, interoperability, and the reusability,
yes,
it doesn't just apply to the big projects, but also to the individual researcher when they work on
Yes,
research.
indeed. And that applies also to the big change in a research culture and change in research workflows to embed those FAIR principles in their work. And here we need big support from the research communities, from the field experts, because in some areas, indeed, they already made great steps in applying those principles to reuse their data, for example. But for some, it's just beginning of their journey.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. This is interesting. So in the future, you talk a bit about the culture change. And in the future, people will most likely share more and let that even grow?
Yes, so we should not only consider the FAIR software, we should consider more like FAIR digital objects, which is also FAIR data, FAIR services, if you like. And all these will be assembled in one FAIR ecosystem, as we would like to call it. So I think we will see in the future just bigger growth and development of those FAIR ecosystems in the different research areas.
Oh, that's some really interesting insight. So we've heard the different modules before already, and they talked as well about open science is bigger than their individual components, than their individual modules. Now here you say something similar with FAIR software. It's not just about the software, but it's a bigger thing.
Yes, indeed.
Nice. Back to you, Lisanne. You mentioned the measuring the impact and the visibility of research. Does this thing, so the small thing that we tend to focus on, whether it's FAIR software, data being reusable, is that included in the metrics somehow as well?
The metric for visibility. Well, I do think, I think for alt metrics, one thing you can do is also measure how data is circulating, how visible that is. So, we often tend to think of research as, articles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, publications. But of course, people can also publish their data or their software. And you can also track how these are doing in social media. I think, and in news media. So I think that is something that the field could also do. I don't know where we are at yet, but I think that is some direction we may go in, that we further diversify the things we are measuring also. And that's also exciting indeed, because then we can also, it's easier to create this ecosystem Marcia talks about, right? Then when we can find more of this data and software.
And social media is an important factor, I hear you say. Are there any benefits or dangers we have to look out for in those type of metrics?
Yeah, I think one thing to just consider is that it's important to be very clear in the way you describe these things, because when you put it out there on social media or open it up, it's out there for everyone, right? And this can also lead maybe to misinterpretation or negativity. That's something that researchers are sometimes concerned about. So I think a starting point is just to make sure you have clear descriptions and clear, descriptions of the data and the information you put out there.
So, Lisanne, we're talking about changing a culture. Can you elaborate a bit on this?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So with impact, we think of the academic often as someone who publishes, right? The quantity of publications is something very important in the way we measured impact. But this right now is changing already. You have in the Netherlands and other European countries this movement called Recognition and Rewards, which really focuses on the academic as a more diverse person. It could be someone who does a lot of teaching, someone who is good at collaborating with different groups, or someone who is a good public science communicator. So we have all these different roles now for academics, and I think in the future these will be more formally embedded in universities and all recognized. So we're getting a more diverse culture, I think, and that's very conducive also to open science.
Nice. That sounds like a great way to start contributing, right? Keep your eyes open for those changing roles within universities, but maybe within the academic world in general as well.
Yeah, I think it will open up science for a more diverse people also to have these different roles and not just the formal one, the formal academic as we used to have, the researcher.
I think that's a great way to end this show. Thank you all for the contributions. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you next time in the MOOC Open Science, sharing your research with the world.